Hey everyone, Kyle Walker here. If you love cars, fixing things, or just want to understand your vehicle better, you're in the right place. I share hands-on tips, smart driving advice, and straight-up car talk without the fluff. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stick around till the end. You don't want to miss what's coming up. Let's get into it.
The concept of compulsory motor liability of drivers in case of an accident has two main goals: to reduce the costs associated with the restoration of vehicles when the car is damaged due to an accident, as well as the prevention of accidents. And if the second factor could not be fully managed, then almost all car owners today agree with the compensation of damages by insurance companies. Of course, there are abuses on both sides. Some drivers commit staged accidents in order to repair their car, which was damaged earlier outside the insured event. Insurers themselves have recently started to impose life insurance and a number of other additional services that have nothing to do with CMTPL insurance. How legitimate such behavior is, whether it is possible to insure a car without life insurance, how to behave when the insurer refuses to conclude a contract if the client is categorically against life insurance. All these questions are relevant for all car owners without exception. Let us try to clarify this situation. Why insurance companies impose life insurance? Many drivers, especially those without much life experience, coming to the insurance company to get a policy of MTPL, face a situation when the contract contains a clause that provides for life insurance. Due to inexperience, incompetence, or unwillingness to enter into a dispute, a significant part of clients agree to such conditions. Meanwhile, the cost of such a service in some cases even exceeds the price of the MTPL policy, in any case significantly increasing the cost of motor liability insurance. On the other hand, life insurance is in principle quite useful for the driver. It is this factor that insurers emphasize when offering such a service as a load. Indeed, the risk of getting into an accident is quite high. Automobile traffic on Russian roads is becoming more and more dense, and the discipline of drivers is falling rapidly. At the same time, the cost of being in a hospital bed is associated with large, and sometimes very large expenses that could be reimbursed by insurers. Those car owners who in principle agree with such arguments, as a rule, agree with the imposed service. But the majority still prefer not to overpay. The question arises, how legitimate are such actions of domestic insurance companies? It turns out that from the legal point of view, they are knowingly wrong. Is it obligatory to insure life when insuring a car? Not at all. All the nuances of the conclusion of the contract of CMTPL insurance are reflected in the relevant federal law on CMTPL insurance. There is no clause about additional services. Moreover, life insurance has nothing to do with the motor liability of drivers. They are completely different types of insurance. Of course, insurers know about this too. So why are they so insistent that they risk their reputation and fines? The minimum penalty is 50,000 rubles, which are quite substantial. For small companies, if they impose additional services, it's all about profit, as life insurance doubles or even triples the price of an MTPL policy. Accordingly, insurers' profits are growing. At the same time, they are ready for any tricks, from pleasing their clients to quite harsh behavior, just so that he would agree to put his signature under the document with an additional clause. Roscoe-Strack, which covers up to 70% of the insurance market in the periphery, was particularly guilty of this, taking advantage of its monopoly. A wave of litigation led to the Supreme Arbitration Court recognizing Roscoe-Strack's actions as unlawful, but this decision did not help to stop the practice of imposing life insurance. It should be noted that the law on compulsory motor TPL insurance is not static. Deputies of the State Duma almost constantly adopt various amendments to it, but none of them affects this aspect of the activities of insurance companies. So the situation is likely to remain the same in the medium term. Insurers will continue to try to impose bondage terms on clients, regardless of the risks of litigation. In addition to life insurance itself, the package of additional services can be extended by adding the following options. Accident Commissioner. It is described as a very convenient and useful service, but in practice the visit of such a specialist is not a frequent occurrence. The reason for this is an extensive list of exceptions, which in most cases allow you to refuse to provide the service. Free tow truck. Also quite convenient. But, of course, not for free. The cost of the service will be reflected in the price of the policy. In addition, it is far from certain that in the area where the service will be required, there is a branch of the insurance company, not to mention the actual tow truck. And you will have to wait for more than 1 hour for the car to arrive from somewhere unknown. Legal support, from the point of view of the car owner, almost useless service, because the collection of documents, if necessary, you will still have to do it yourself. Of course, they will try to make you believe that all the offered options are in high demand. However, the cumulative probability of situations that require compensation for losses, in this case, tends to zero, but allows insurers to compensate for losses from auto insurance. In this case, such donors are car owners. Algorithm of drawing up an auto insurance policy without life insurance. It should be noted that officially the insurer has no right to refuse to conclude a contract of auto insurance if you have provided a full package of necessary documents, since in this case the mechanism of public offer is applicable. This means that there is a unified algorithm of actions related to the purchase/renewal of the MTPL policy throughout the country. Choosing a service provider, selecting a service, in our case, the provision of a CMTPL insurance policy without any additional services. Collection of a set of documents. Passport of the Russian Federation resident. Passport of the vehicle, car registration document. If available, the previous MTPL policy, as well as a certificate indicating the absence of accidents, issued by the insurance company, with which the car owner had a previous contract. However, the last document is not mandatory, although you will certainly be asked to provide it if you have previously worked with another IC, signing the contract, payment for the service, receiving the policy in hand. You can insure your car without life insurance if you are convinced that the basic service is sufficient. The IC, for its part, has no right to refuse to provide you with a policy unless you have not provided a complete package of documents. Read also, the most reliable car on the secondary market, how to apply for an MTPL policy without additional services. If you persistently impose life insurance, there is an opportunity to refuse it, both at the stage of registration of a new contract and when extending the validity of the previously concluded one. You can do it both verbally and in writing, and the second option is more preferable, although it will require specific efforts from you. First of all, you need to write a corresponding application in which you indicate that you do not want to insure life insurance at the conclusion of the contract of compulsory motor TPL insurance. The document is written in the name of the head of the insurance company, in the head of the application your full name, as well as registration data. The text itself is drawn up in any form, but with the obligatory indication of the number of the contract in which UIC imposed. Insurance products that do not relate to motor liability, as well as the circumstances that indicate that such actions on the part of the insurer have been taken illegally. The document is drawn up in 3 copies. The first is provided to the IC. The second may be required when the case comes to court proceedings. The third should be sent by mail to Rospotrебnadzor, alternatively, to the Central Bank of the Russian Federation, where your application will be considered from the point of view of violation of consumer rights to take appropriate measures. In this case, as the injured party, you can count not only on a full refund, if you had time to pay for the service, but also on compensation for moral damage. Usually such a response indicates that your claims are justified. With this document, you should reapply to the IC, demanding to realize your rights to conclude a contract without additional services. If the insurer repeatedly refuses to issue a policy without life insurance, you should demand from the insurance company that such a refusal was provided in writing only. It should be attached to the statement of claim. As a rule, such cases are considered in court for 2, maximum 3 months. Note that you can terminate a bonded contract at any time, not necessarily at the stage of conclusion of the contract. In this case, you will have to pay a penalty, but the IC has no right to refuse to terminate the contract. As practice shows, car owners do not often take such a step because the expediency of such an action, especially in the late terms of the contract, is extremely low, especially in view of the long terms of consideration of such cases. According to independent experts, at present there is no reason to believe that such practices on the part of insurance companies will go away. They will continue to look for any loopholes in the current legislation to minimize their losses. What to do if an IC imposes life insurance? Let's consider what an ordinary owner of a vehicle can do if, when applying to an insurance company, life insurance is imposed on him in addition to the MTPL policy. The simplest step is to refuse the services and start looking for a more decent insurer. If you are persistent enough, you can still find a company that provides car insurance without life insurance. You can take a different route. For example, try to get a written refusal to conclude the contract from the insurer. Although the managers of the IC are unlikely to agree to provide you with such a document, which may later come to the company's disadvantage. Therefore, it makes sense to somehow document the very fact of refusal to issue a policy because you do not want to pay more. For example, by turning on a voice recorder or a camera on your smartphone. These materials will be useful to you in court. However, you should take into account that such cases are considered for several months. But you will be able to achieve payment of moral/material damage. Thus, the insurance company will be forced to compensate the expenses for the use of the rented car because of the inability to drive your own vehicle due to the lack of a MTPL policy. And if you use the vehicle to generate income, then compensation is also subject to lost profits. It is possible not to refuse to conclude the contract, but in the margins of the form to indicate that the company refused to issue a CMTPL policy without life insurance. A copy of this document, together with a statement about the illegality of the insurer's actions, can be sent to Rospotrебнадзор, which will be forced to respond to your appeal. If the decision is positive, you can cancel the contract, get your money back without any penalties, and try to get moral and/or material compensation. There is another way to get what you want: to write an application to the IC and send it by registered mail with a mandatory delivery stamp. The application itself should contain the following text, not necessarily verbatim. I ask the insurance company to conclude a contract of motor liability in respect of the car, specify specific data, having entered in the document of the drivers, specify who will drive the vehicle. I enclose a package of necessary documents, copies of the driver's license, passport of the resident of the Russian Federation, diagnostic card, registration certificate of the vehicle. I ask to inform about the results of consideration of the application in writing to such and such address or by phone, specify phone number. According to the law, the IC must respond to the application. Either by consent, you will be invited to conclude the contract, or by written refusal, which insurers rarely do, because they can be fined a substantial amount. Another option can be called not very popular. It consists in agreeing to sign the contract on the terms and conditions of the insurance company, but after a few days the contract is terminated at your initiative with the subsequent payment of a penalty. The reason for the unpopularity of this method: there is a possibility that the ratio of the penalty to the amount of the insurance premium will be disadvantageous for you. Finally, today there is an opportunity to register an MTPL policy online, but this service is provided by a limited number of ICs. But in this case, you will not have any additional costs, and the cost of the policy is calculated through online calculators. And it is the received amount will be the final one. Since this way of concluding contracts for insurers is unprofitable, it is mainly used only by large companies that value their reputation. Read also, manufacturing and installation with their own hands cup holder in the car. In practice, most drivers do not bother and buy a policy together with life insurance, significantly overpaying. And according to statistics, the probability of serious damage to the driver is an order of magnitude less than the car. So it is worth fighting for your rights. What to do if the insurance company refuses to issue MTPL insurance without life insurance? If you still bought a policy of motor insurance together with the imposed additional service of life insurance, you still have the opportunity to compensate for the increase in the cost of auto insurance. However, you have only 5 days from the date of registration of the MTPL insurance policy to do so, and the following conditions must be met. The period of validity of the additional life insurance service exceeds 30 days. During these 5 days, the policyholder has not used the imposed policy for compensation. In principle, RAMI is responsible for monitoring both parties' compliance with the rules on refunds under the imposed contract. So, Any complaints about irregularities relating to refunds should be directed to this organization. If you refuse to provide additional services and the insurer responded by pointing at your door, it makes sense to appeal against his actions to the UFAS. If you have documented such a refusal and provide evidence that you were refused precisely because of your unwillingness to issue a motor third-party liability insurance without additional services that increase its cost, such a complaint may have an effect. In this case, the IC will not only have to draw up the contract according to the rules, but also to pay a substantial fine. The same measure will be applied to the manager who made a miscalculation, so it is so important to document your communication with representatives of the insurance company. By the way, a justified complaint can also be sent to Rospotrебnadzor. This organization also has sufficient powers to influence insurers. A lot of problems arise due to the fact that IC, which have a license to conclude contracts on motor liability, use any, even purely formal violations on the part of car owners. Ignorance of the reasons that can be the reason for refusal to issue a policy of MTPL insurance complicates the possibility of termination of the contract with a refund. Therefore, it makes sense to familiarize yourself with these legal grounds. If the policy is issued by the representative of the car owner who applied to the IC without a notarized power of attorney, or with a document that does not contain a clause on the right of insurance by a proxy, if the client has not provided the original of the required documents. If the documents are in order, formally you can refuse to issue a contract, referring to the lack of connection with the DB Rami. It is quite difficult to prove the opposite directly, because you do not have the right to inspect the manager's workplaces in any way. Insurers actively take advantage of this, often deceiving their clients. But if they tell you that Rami is not available at the moment and other managers are working with clients, drawing up contracts, it makes sense to document this moment in order to appeal against the refusal. In principle, you can be patient and sit in the office until the employees of the IC do not give up. But if they also show persistence, which is quite understandable because it is their money, you can complain about such actions to the prosecutor's office, UFAS, or the central bank. The second most common formal reason for refusal to issue a car insurance policy is the lack of forms. In reality, such a situation is extremely rare. For the same reason, it is not in the interests of the IC. So if they tell you that they cannot issue you a policy, you can be sure that there are forms, but they hide them. The strategy of behavior here is similar to the method described above. Try to sit in the office for a while, and the forms will definitely appear. If free time is in short supply, or there is no desire to seek justice in this way, you can safely complain about the insurance company in the above-mentioned instances. But in this case, you should be prepared for the fact that the consideration of the complaint may be lengthy in time. And one more nuance: if the previous insurance expires, you will not be able to operate your car. More precisely, you will be able to drive, but if you are stopped by a traffic police officer, the absence of a valid MTPL insurance policy is a violation that threatens serious penalties. If you are not stopped by such a risk, remember that in case of an accident you will have to repair both your own and someone else's car at your own expense. So the best way to solve the problem without overpaying for additional services is to look for an adequate insurance company. If you live in a big city, there should be no problems with this. But for residents of small towns, the algorithm of actions described above can be very useful, where you can buy an MTPL policy without overpaying for life insurance. Although from a legal point of view, it is possible to issue a contract of auto insurance without overpayments in any IC. In practice, there are problems with this. Currently, there are about 40 regions in the country where life/health insurance will be imposed on you when you take out an MTPL policy. And the trend is that the number of such regions is constantly growing. It has gotten to the point that in some cities, mostly located in the periphery far away from megacities, it is almost impossible to get an MTPL policy without additional services. The vast majority of insurance companies, the choice of which is considerable, will try in one way or another to induce you to life insurance and other insurance services not related to motor liability. It is not easy to find an IC that works with clients honestly, but it is possible. Usually such information is sought on specialized forums, social networks, and other online resources. It is noteworthy that here much depends on a particular region. So, in Moscow IC Rosgosstrak offers MTPL policies without imposing other services, and in the Kostroma region, the same company sells insurance, motor insurance, with life insurance. In conclusion, obtaining a motor third-party liability, MTPL, policy without the need for life insurance is entirely feasible. By understanding the specific requirements and exploring various insurance providers, you can secure the coverage you need to protect yourself and others on the road. Remember to compare different options, read the fine print, and choose a policy that best fits your circumstances. With the right approach, you can navigate the process smoothly and ensure you are adequately covered. Thank you for watching, and we hope this guide has been helpful in your journey to getting the right MTPL policy.